change can be scary. Even in the computing world, where change is a constant, software and hardware and services and companies and people all in a perpetual state of flux. When something lasts for more than a few years, it's almost surprising. I mean, how many products and services has Google killed off in the last 2 years alone? Don't try to answer that. That's like asking how many stars are in the heavens. The correct answer is more than a couple. Despite this constant change, the Linux kernel has continued development since the early 90s. Steady, consistent. Entire operating systems and huge corporations have been created, flourished, and disappeared in that time. So with the current news that the creator and maintainer of Linux taking a break, now seems like a good time to think through what the future of Linux could look like without Linus. He's stated that he intends to keep at it, but you never know. In his time off, he might find a new passion for archery and decide to dedicate his life to traveling to Renaissance fairs around the world dressed as Robin Hood. Probably playing a lute. Linus just seems like a guy that would play the lute. Linus and his lute. I like alliteration. Stranger things have happened. Let's start with a simple hypothetical. Linus Torvalds takes a break from Linux and simply never returns to it. This seems like a pretty simple scenario, actually. There are quite a few well-experienced Linux kernel developers that clearly have the chops to take on the work that Linus currently handles as the gatekeeper of code. Heck, Linus even named Greg Crowe-Hartman to handle this work while Linus is himself on break, which to me is a clear indication that he would be the heir apparent for the master of all Linux role. Sort of like when a CEO steps down at a company and a new interim CEO gets appointed. Sure, that's a temporary position, an ICEO, but it's well understood that this is typically a way to test out a new person in the role before making it permanent. Sure, there may be some unease for many, as Linus has done a pretty remarkable job of keeping Linux moving forward for the last quarter of a century, and then some. But from an engineering standpoint, seems like we're in pretty safe hands. A bigger issue could be that of the name and trademark. To my understanding, Linus himself owns the trademark to Linux, which is administered by the Linux Foundation, specifically by LinuxMark, which you can see at linuxmark.org. I'm assuming that the Linux Foundation has taken steps to ensure that they can continue to administer that trademark even if Linus himself decides he doesn't want them to anymore. But that's really just a branding issue, and while potential brand or name change could be chaotic, the project would survive just fine. While we're talking hypothetical anyway, let's kick things up a notch, because I love me a good hypothetical doomsday scenario. What if Linus took his ball and went home? What if, after taking some time off, he realized, gee, I sure do like working on Linux, but I don't want to do it with company backing anymore. I'm going to only work on it independently and only with my friends. It's crazy, I know, but it could happen. Heck, I bet he could make an absolute killing through crowdfunding Linux development. I know I'd support him on Patreon. That's all a little bit of a joke, but seriously, what if? In that scenario, would other organizations, companies, the Linux Foundation, etc., fork away from Linus's Linux in order to maintain some form of corporate influence of the project? Most of the contributions at this point are specifically to support commercial interests, with some of the biggest contributors being part of the Linux Foundation trade organization, so a fork wouldn't be entirely out of the question for them. Would they need to rename it to something else? Probably. Would Linux Foundation itself need to change the name of their organization? Also probably. What would all the various Linux distributions do? Would they maintain compatibility with both kernels? Would some go with the Linus approved version while others standardizing on the non-Linus Linux fork, whatever it's called? Immediately, it probably wouldn't cause many issues, as they would both likely be source and binary compatible. but that could only last for so long. Okay, this scenario is a little on the scary side, I'll admit. It's mildly terrifying. Luckily, it does seem pretty gosh darned unlikely. Or does it? This is one of those moments where I sit back and I think, gosh, Lunduke, you're a ridiculous human being. Sponsored in part by Purism, who make amazing laptops that ship with GNU/Linux, or as I've taken to calling it, GNU plus Linux. However you want to call it, they put free software on laptops. They make the BIOS as free software as they can. They open all that stuff up, and they put hardware kill switches for things like the wireless and the webcam. How rad is that? Find out more over at Purism's website, puri.sm, and Pogo Linux. They love Linux so much, they put Linux in their business and domain name. That's how rad and committed these guys are. Huge fan of these dudes. Been seeing them around for, gosh, well over a decade now at conferences and the like, and really, really proud to have them sponsoring the show. Go to their website, go to pogolinux.com, configure yourself some servers, even if you don't intend to buy them, because they're just so choice to look at. The stuff they got is incredible. Pogolinux.com and Lulzbot 3D printers, which I'm still kind of bummed out. Normally, in my old setup here, I had a Lulzbot Mini sitting right here, which is my favorite 3D printers. I have a Lulzbot Mini and a Lulzbot Taz. The Mini has a nice little 6-inch by 6-inch print bed. It's fantastic. And the Taz is much bigger, about 11 plus inches for the print bed. It's huge. It's a beast of a 3D printer. The Taz is an industrial, awesome piece of technology. But there's something about the Lulzbot Mini I can't put my finger on. It's the right size as to be approachable and not take up too much space to make your significant other mad. But it prints a large enough print area that you can print most like toys and Raspberry Pi cases and the like that you can find at Thingiverse.com, which, by the way, is a great website. It's unrelated. They don't sponsor the show. Just go to Thingiverse.com and search around. It's fantastic. I printed out a ton of like toy railroad tracks for my kid and Raspberry Pi cases. There's so much stuff there. It's amazing. Anyway, Lulzbot 3D printers, they're great. Go to lulzbot.com. And if you're watching this show over on YouTube or Library or any of the various other places, you can get the MP4, the MP3, or the written article version of this show if you go over to patreon.com/Brian Lunduke. The supporters of that show help keep the lights on here, help keep things rocking and rolling, and I couldn't do it without all of your help. I truly couldn't. It would be impossible because all the lights would go off, like this one. That'd be less light. And this one would be less light. Look at all these. Look at all this light. Actually, this one just makes me spooky. I like this one. I'll be like, this is what it would look like without Patreon support. So you want to go there and help the show out. That's it for today. We're changing up. I'm gonna put this down. That's a crazy little spotlight. In fact, I'm gonna turn the other lights back on. The Patreon people keep me rocking and rolling, so they deserve lights. We're slowly kind of testing out a few stylistic things here at the show. So you've noticed the last couple of episodes have been written articles that I read out loud, and that has a certain benefit, as I like to write, and it scratches that itch for me. Plus, a whole bunch of people wanted to be able to read articles from me on a regular basis. I used to write for outlets like Network World and the like, and I don't do that anymore. And so now, if you're a Patreon subscriber, every time I write one of these articles, you get an email in your inbox with the full article. It's really, really handy. Anyway, so I'm going to continue doing that, but never fear, the long-form shows aren't going anywhere. I've got more long-form shows this next week that are unscripted, off the cuff, and completely random. But I'm enjoying doing this scripted thing, too. It's a whole lot of fun. All right, that's it for today. I'll see you kids tomorrow.